All right. Good morning, Tim. Thanks so much for being here with me this morning. Actually, I guess it's afternoon for you.
That's okay. Thanks for having me, whatever time it is.
Yeah, I have to confess, I actually hadn't heard of your book, regretfully, and I wish that I'd had, because I could have definitely gotten use out of it. It was our mutual friend, Christine Gilbert, who recommended it to me, and she said that she actually uses it when she's choosing a place to go to kind of get the insider information, and that's how she makes a decision on where she's going to go.
Oh, well, good. Yeah, and she actually supplied a bonus report thing that I give away with that book too. So, yeah, we go back a ways and try to trade good advice.
Awesome. So we're here today to talk a little bit about the Creative Accelerator, which the Creative Accelerator is a bundle of courses and ebooks, including yours. And they're designed by all kinds of creative entrepreneurs. We have artists, photographers, digital marketing experts, and travel experts such as yourself, and a few business coaches as well. But these courses, if you were to buy them individually, would be valued at over $2,000. But the end of next week, starting on January 28th, for 3 days only, so for 72 hours, we're going to be offering all those courses for just $129.
Yeah, quite a deal.
So anyways, thanks again. Yeah, it is a deal. And so for the first 1,000 people that buy that bundle, they are also going to get a copy of your book titled A Better Life for Half the Price.
I happen to have one right here, so we can
awesome. Let's see it.
They're going to get the ebook, but this is the actual. It is available as a physical paperback, but these days it's a lot easier to just take it with you on an e-reader. So anyway.
Yeah, there's some books though. I have a handful of books that I actually lug around in my suitcase, and yours sounds like maybe it'll be added to that pile for me.
I go back and forth. When I'm at home, I usually read a real paperback, but if you're traveling somewhere for 2 or 3 weeks, it's a lot easier to carry a whole bunch with you in that little e-reader.
Absolutely. So it's funny. I mean, A Better Life at Half the Price tells me a lot about what I'm going to get. And I haven't read your book yet. I'm excited to. But I actually went on your website before the call, and I was really pleasantly surprised. It's a lot more than just how much my lifestyle is going to cost. I just quickly was scanning, and you know, I guess because I made this mistake myself, I recently spent 2 months in Greece, and the time difference between Greece and the United States, which is where I do most of my business with, is 10 hours. And I'm a morning person, so I was doing all of my coaching calls with clients at like 11 o'clock at night, and it was horrible. And I noticed on your site that you say like Latin America is such a good choice for North Americans because, simply because of the time difference. Like you can still conduct your business without having to be up in the middle of the night. So anyways, can you tell us a little bit about what people can expect to find in your book?
Yeah, sure. Part of what I'm doing in there is to try to narrow down people's options, because, you know, there are a lot of places all over the world that any of us could live, assuming we can still make a buck and keep the bills paid. And so that is one prime consideration. You know, I know Americans who have moved to Thailand and lived in Chiang Mai for a while and just ended up having to move somewhere else because of the time difference. And, you know, they had the kind of business where they still needed to do sales calls or coaching calls like you were talking about. And It's just really hard to be on a completely different time than everyone else that you're doing business with. So if you are, you know, trying to run an online business where you do have to talk to people regularly, a lot of times it's easier to sort of not go more than 2 or 3 time zones off, or maybe at the most, you know, go to England or, you know, some part of, or Portugal, you know, some part of Europe that's not too far away. But then, of course, if you're retired, then it doesn't matter. Or if you're going to teach English, you know, or something like that, that's actually physically on site, then you don't have to worry about that so much. But of course, climate's a big, you know, consideration for people. Others want to be in a place where they can speak English all the time, and so that rules out some spots. Some places are easier to work and, you know, get a local job. Others are easier to run an online business because they have good internet. So I'm trying to give the real pros and cons of each place that you might want to consider. And one of the considerations, I mean, one of the criticisms of a lot of publications like International Living and Live and Invest Overseas and ones like that, is they paint this really rosy picture of every place they're talking about and don't spend much time on the downsides. And I'm trying to give people the downsides too, so they're not getting nasty surprises.
That's good to know. I personally really appreciate that. And I think anywhere you go, it's a mixed bag. And for, one person, what might be a problem, if you're, like you say, if you're retired, the internet connection probably doesn't really matter so much, just to do those Skype calls with grandkids and whatnot. But if you're trying to run an online empire, it certainly does.
Yeah. And of course, cost matters too. I mean, the sort of overriding theme that runs through that book is you can live in any of these places for half of what you're spending now. And, that's hard to say for certainty for every situation. But so the little caveat, I guess, is I would at least say that you should be considering urban to urban or rural to rural. Like, if you're moving from the middle of Iowa and you're going to Buenos Aires or Lisbon, well, you might not be going for half price. But if you're going from New York City to one of those places, you're definitely living for half price. So so I didn't consider really expensive countries in there, like Western Europe or Scandinavia, countries that you could be spending a whole lot more than you are now. The whole idea is you move to these places for a better quality of life, but also you get a lot more for your money.
Yeah. So Tim, can you tell me how long, so you have been doing this and that's how you do your research. How long have you been doing this?
Well, in my younger days, when I was a backpacker before I had a kid, my wife and I actually taught English in Istanbul, Turkey, and in Seoul, Korea. So we lived both of those places for, pretty long time. And then I was a travel writer also at the same time. And so I was traveling around a lot doing that. And so sometimes I wasn't necessarily living in a country with a specific address, but I was spending, 2 months in the country traveling around and really getting to know it well. But my last, real serious living abroad stint is I have a house in Guanajuato, Mexico, and I've been living there with my family for 3 of the past 5 years. And so that's my personal experience with it. But I kind of have one leg in the U.S. and one leg there because my daughter's 15 and she's in high school. So we're actually back in the U.S. right now so she can finish up high school here. And then when she's kicked out of the house, we'll, go back on the road. But, I interviewed a lot of people in that book. So it wasn't just me blabbing about my own personal experience.
Yeah.
I interviewed people living in, in Cambodia and in Thailand and in Panama and all these other places. So I could really give a sense of what it's like.
Yeah. It's funny, it does shift once you have kids, right? That's why Christine Gilbert became such a role model for me, because I see all these, and I taught English in Spain, and then I traveled around a lot as a right out of college. But then I was like, how do you do this with kids? And I started looking for people who were traveling with kids, and it can be done. It can be a little more stressful, and it definitely takes a little more planning. It definitely robs the spontaneity out of it. But I think once they get older, my kids are 4 and 6. I think once they get older, like your daughter being 15, they have their own interests in life, and my kids are just kind of happy to go wherever I drag them along.
Yeah, I would say if you got kids that are, elementary school age or younger, there's no reason not to go live abroad somewhere, because, I mean, it's not like the education at that point is going to make or break them. It's when they get into high school and start taking those really advanced courses and have to start filling out college applications that it gets a little more problematic. But there are ways around that too. I mean, there are international schools all over the country, and a lot of those are internationally recognized. We just didn't happen to be in a large enough city where that was an option. But if we were living in Guadalajara or Mexico City, a place like that had some kind of international baccalaureate school, we probably could have stayed on if we wanted. But I think my daughter also wanted to go to an American high school and, wanted to live out the life like it looks like on the Disney Channel. So.
Yeah, I can't take that away from her. I had a quick question for you. So it's funny because for a lot of people, I mean, I know in the community that you're in the travel blogging community, this isn't anything new, but for I think a lot of people that are going to be potentially purchasing the Creative Accelerator and are kind of like in my target demographic, I think this can really be sort of like, wow, you know, like mind-boggling. I think I hear so many people say to me like, oh, you're so lucky, like I want to travel, but I can't afford it. Can you, because I think you kind of dispel that myth. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's kind of something that drives us frequent travelers crazy when people say something like that, because really, we all have the same amount of hours, and, a lot of us are in the same general boat as far as our income. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of what you spend it on, and what your priorities are. And a lot of the times those people who tell me they can't afford to travel are the ones that have, two BMWs in the driveway and a gigantic McMansion, and they're sending their kid to private school. And, they're spending so much just to exist, before they even get to the disposable income part, that they don't have anything left. And
Yeah.
the other side of that is it's often cheaper to travel than it is just to pay your monthly bills in the U.S. And that can be as close as Mexico even. I mean, if you go to Mexico or Guatemala or Panama, or a lot of these countries that are really close by, they're literally half the price when you go out to eat or go out to a bar, or go on an adventure excursion, whatever, just because the cost of labor is so much lower, and they usually have lower taxes and lower real estate prices, and that impacts everything. So this is something long-term backpackers discover really quickly, is that they can travel around the world almost nonstop if they want, for a fourth of what they spent just to pay rent and have a car at home. And so I think people are sort of just using that as an excuse a lot of times to say they can't afford it. And it just means I haven't saved any money. That's what it really boils down to. And so, they could easily afford a trip just by making a few adjustments in their life. And if travel's number 8 on your list, then yeah, it's probably not going to get done. But if you move it up to number 4 on your priority list, then maybe it will get done.
Yeah. I think maybe you need to touch your screen. For some reason, it's blacking out on my end. I don't know if we went to screensaver or something.
No, not on my end. Are you seeing it now?
Well, we won't worry about it then.
Strange. I could see my screen and see you fine.
Okay, perfect. It might just be mine. One of the other questions I get all the time, and maybe you go into this in your book, one of the questions I get all the time, we drove from Lake Tahoe in California, we drove down all the way down to Oaxaca. And it's just the danger piece. People think that it's so much more dangerous in other countries than in the States. How do you handle that when people say that to you?
Yeah, I just had this conversation with someone this morning who does marketing for a resort in Belize, and there was just a murder this week in Belize of some prominent journalist, and it's big news all over the world. But the reason is big news all over the world is because it doesn't happen very often, whereas where people actually live, that kind of stuff happens every single day. If you pull up the crime stats for most U.S. cities compared to the rest of the world, they're pretty horrible. I mean, we have far more gun violence, far more murders. We have far more people in prison than any other country per capita. And so I think people are just, once again, it's an excuse a lot of times. And it's also, this is a psychological problem that's been well documented, that people pay a lot more attention to what's on the news than they should. What's happened yesterday as opposed to what's happened over the last 5 years. And if they really compared where they live to where they're going, most of the time they're going to be much safer where they're going, unless they've signed up for the army and they're going to a war zone. Otherwise, there are, of course, certain places you want to avoid. The border cities in Mexico are not very nice places to hang out. The 2 largest cities in Honduras are probably best avoided. But if you're going to Roatan Island to go scuba diving, then what do you care what's happening in the 2 largest cities in Honduras? And it's the same for most of the world. There are problems and they make the news, but it's usually because they're an outlier. It's usually because something strange has happened. There's been a bombing or whatever. It's not that Paris is dangerous on a regular basis or Istanbul is dangerous on a regular basis. It's just that's what you saw in the news last week.
Yeah. Oh, you're preaching to the choir. There's a great TED Talk. I don't know if you're into TED Talks, but Peter Diamandis did a TED Talk. It's quite a few years old now, but I love it. It's called Abundance. And he talks about how the brain is designed to protect us. And so it's that flight or flight mode. And so we could hear 10 things, but we're always going to latch on to the thing that we think we need to remember or to to, know to protect ourselves,
Yeah,
So,
and that's scientifically backed up by, we tend to remember the most recent thing, whether it's valid or not. And there's a great book that I've been reading called Thinking Fast and Slow, and he talks about that. He abbreviates it, but like, what you see is all there is. So you just remember what you most recently saw, not what you would logically think of as the answer.
yeah. Well, Tim, I don't want to take up too much of your time. You've been so generous, but what would you say to someone who, who kind of wants to make this shift that it seems, maybe they're just starting out and it just seems really overwhelming. They've got a mortgage and, car payments and, they're really entrenched in kind of that month to month North American cycle.
Yeah.
What would you say to them if they want to make a shift to kind of making their life look a little bit more like yours?
Well, my number one advice is to just take a couple weeks or a month if you can and go somewhere that you think would be a place you'd like to live, and just rent an apartment, live like a local, and spend some quiet time there, turn off the screens and the beeps and everything, and just start thinking about what you really want out of life and what you need out of life. And so that accomplishes two things. It helps you really try out the place and see if it's a place you could stand living and that you would like as much as you would on vacation, maybe. Just because you like the place on vacation doesn't mean you like living there. But that also gives you the chance to evaluate your life and see if what you're spending money on is really making you happy. I mean, if that BMW is like the most exciting thing in your life when you get up every day and it really makes you happy, then okay, keep spending money on that car payment. But if you're just blowing lots of money on things you're not using, or you've got a garage full of stuff that you bought and then put away, you could probably sell that stuff in your garage and have enough to live on for months in most of these countries. So we don't really need as much stuff as we think we need. A lot of times we just kind of get in the habit of collecting it and using it. And that's another thing that backpackers discover really quickly. They go around the world with just a pack and discover that there's not all that much stuff they miss. They miss certain food, they miss their friends. They don't necessarily miss all that stuff they stuck in storage before they left. And so, it's a good lesson to just kind of pare down a bit for a while and live somewhere out of one suitcase. And you often discover that, okay, maybe once in a while you wish you had a nice new dress or something, but overall, you tend to realize what's important in life is not necessarily stuff that'll fill up a 3,000 square foot house.
You're preaching to the choir.
And, one last thing on that, if you move to a cheaper place and your cost of living goes down to, $2,000 a month or whatever, then you also don't have to earn as much. A lot of people work their ass off just because they've got so many bills to pay. And that's why they need $5,000 or $6,000 a month. Whereas if you can cut that down, by half or by 2/3, then you don't have to work so hard either.
Yeah, totally agree. It's funny. For me, the trigger point with making this change was I was a mom to two young kids. I had at the time that I just broke out. My daughter was 1 and my son was 3. And I mean, my husband and I were both we were working 2 jobs. I was working at community college. I mean, I was spending more money on childcare than I was on my mortgage. And I just thought, what am I doing? Like, if I lived someplace, and my husband's from Argentina. So it's, and we had both been travelers before having children. We loved travel. We met traveling. But then we just kind of fell victim to that myth that once you have children, you got to settle down, you got to have a permanent address. And I think what I really got out of what you just said is it really is about, aligning our values with how we spend our money. And I think so often, we spend it unconsciously and we're trying to feed something. But anyways,
we're all kind of brainwashed in a sense. I mean, religion operates this way, companies operate this way, and in a sense, communities and how we live our life operates this way. You have to go to college, work hard, get a good job, get your big house. There's a lot of things that are perpetuated in our culture that maybe were true at one time, or maybe are true for some people that aren't necessarily true now, or aren't necessarily true for everyone. So, step back and examine those beliefs and see if it necessarily has to be that way.
Absolutely. Well, Tim, thank you so much again. I'm really excited to have you be a part of this bundle, and I'm really excited about it. I really think that anyone who's kind of wanting to make these shifts and change, this bundle is an incredible deal. It has all of the things that you would really need to do to figure out what kind of business you would want to start. You know, what destination would you want to live in with your bundle? There's business coaches, there's a ton of strategy, and you know, I've spent a lot of money on this stuff over the last 2 years. So to be a part of this is really exciting, and we just really appreciate your generosity with it, and we really do think it's going to empower anyone who wants to make this shift to make this shift. So
great. I'm glad to be a part of it, and looking forward to checking out everything.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's really great to connect with you. And sorry about the time snafu. I think I'm still on
sorry
Greece
about
time.
the technical difficulties. But well, thanks, Tiffany. Have a great day.
All right. Take care, Tim. We'll talk soon.
All right,
Bye-bye.
sure. Bye-bye.